Imagine what it would be like to have absolute control over your emotions. To be able to remain calm in the midst of chaos and find profound answers in moments of silence. What we often fail to realize is that true power lies not in the words we speak, but in the words we choose not to speak. Throughout history, great leaders, kings, and prophets have discovered a transforming secret: silence. Beyond being an absence of words, silence is a powerful tool that can transform situations and hearts. When you choose to remain silent in the face of provocation, you force the other person to face themselves. The words they throw into the air do not find an echo in you, and having no response, they lose their strength. At that point, they are forced to stop and reconsider because there is nothing to fuel them. Proverbs 15 verses 1 reminds us, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." And while this verse speaks of soft words, what can be softer than a well-measured silence? When you choose to be silent, you are offering a response as powerful as the wisest of words. Think of Jesus. During his trial, when he was falsely accused by the religious leaders, he chose silence. Matthew 26 verses 63 tells us, "But Jesus was silent." This was not a silence of surrender or passivity. It was a silence filled with authority, an act of resistance in the face of injustice. Proverbs 17 verses 28 also tells us, "Even a fool, when he is silent, is counted wise. He who shuts his lips is prudent." This means that silence not only has an effect on others, but it also changes how we are perceived. Imagine for a moment that you are in the middle of a storm of accusations. Words are flying like arrows and seem to be aimed at you with the intention of hurting you. The only thing that separates you from being hit is your ability to remain calm. That silence is not weakness, but a strategic position in the midst of an adverse situation. The most common reaction would be to speak up, defend yourself, or respond with the same intensity. But if you choose silence, something surprising happens. You begin to hear what is really happening around you. Proverbs 21 verses 23 teaches us, "He who keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps his soul from trouble." Being silent not only disarms others, but it also silences the internal noise that can cloud your judgment. When you choose not to respond with the same fury, you not only avoid falling into the game of provocation, but you also free yourself from the chains of empty arguments. Instead of wasting your energy on chaos, you become someone who observes, reflects, and acts wisely at the right time. Silence is not only a defensive tool, it also acts as a mirror that reflects the intentions of others. This mirror allows people to confront their own motivations, while you remain steadfast and at peace. This kind of silence is not a surrender. It is a declaration of emotional independence, a way of demonstrating that we are not dependent on the approval or recognition of those around us. It is a conscious decision not to enter into the game of those who seek to destabilize us. When Jesus stood before Pilate, he chose silence. Pilate, astonished, asked him, "Do you not speak to me?" John 19 verses 10. This silence was not empty. It was an act charged with purpose and meaning. Jesus did not have to justify himself before Pilate because his mission transcended any earthly judgment. This moment teaches us that sometimes silence is the most powerful response when faced with injustice. A similar example is found in the experience of Elijah. After a time of spectacular and dramatic events, Elijah listened to God in a gentle and delicate hiss. In 1 Kings 19 verses 12 we read, "And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a gentle and soft hissing." This passage reminds us that God does not always manifest himself in the rumbling, but in the deep silence of our being. When you choose to be silent, you are not only closing your lips, you are also pausing the tumult of your thoughts, finding calm in the midst of chaos. To be silent is not just a physical action, it is a state of the soul. It is choosing to trust that there is a greater plan at work on your behalf, even if you can't see it clearly in the moment. Silence is not inaction. It is active waiting, a deep faith that understands that some answers only come when we stop pursuing them in desperation. David expressed this truth in Psalm 62 verses 1, "In God alone my soul is quiet, from Him comes my salvation." This kind of waiting, this resting in God, transforms silence into a tool that strengthens us spiritually. Jesus, with His silence, also taught us to resist peacefully in the face of injustice. It is not necessary to respond to every provocation. Sometimes the greatest act of fortitude is not to give in to the temptation to respond with the same weapons that are used against us. When He chose not to argue or justify Himself, He showed that His purpose was far greater than any attack. Moreover, silence has the power to open doors. When difficulties seem to crush us and thoughts cloud our minds, silence offers us a refuge. It is a moment to stop and allow something greater than ourselves to take over. During His passion, Jesus could have shouted His innocence or condemned those who accused Him, but He chose the path of inner peace. His silence teaches us that we do not need the validation of others to confirm our righteousness. Elijah, after his great victory against the prophets of Baal, experienced fear and despair. In his distress, he sought God in the wind, the earthquake, and the fire, but God was not in those phenomena. It was in the gentle and delicate whistling that Elijah found the guidance he so desperately needed. This story reminds us that the most meaningful answers do not always come in noise, but in the stillness of connection with God. Another powerful example is when Peter, in his impulsiveness, cut off a servant's ear during Jesus' arrest. Instead of fanning the conflict, Jesus calmed the situation, healing the wounded man, Luke 22 verses 51. This act of calm and restoration teaches us that silence, combined with purposeful actions, has a healing power that transcends any act of revenge. When someone hurts us with words, our immediate instinct is to defend ourselves or strike back. But what if instead of reacting, you chose silence? Not a passive or resigned silence, but one charged with intention and peace. Sometimes, the gentlest and most powerful response is simply not to respond. Just as Proverbs 15 verses 1 says, "When you choose not to speak in the midst of an offense, you break the cycle of tension and conflict." This silence is not easy to practice, but it is profoundly healing. Luke 5 verses 16 tells us that Jesus withdrew to deserted places to pray. It was not the noise of the crowd that strengthened Him, but those moments of deep silence and connection with the Father. Before we delve further into this content, I kindly ask you to show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing this essential message. The art of silence requires patience and humility, especially in the midst of our personal storms. Instead of hitting back, you create a space of peace where there was aggression before. This space not only protects you emotionally, but can also lead the offender to reflect on his or her own words and actions. Silence acts as a mirror that allows others to face the impact of their actions. And in that moment of stillness, we find the calm necessary to act with divine wisdom. As James 1 verse 19 says, "Let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger." In a world where raising your voice is valued, the kingdom of God teaches us that true power lies in knowing when to be silent in order to listen. When you master the art of silence, you discover that the answers you were looking for were not in your words, but in that sacred space where God speaks in stillness and silence. That act of not responding with equal harshness reflects true strength. This kind of silence does not deny the pain, but is a conscious choice not to perpetuate it. By remaining silent, you choose not to carry the weight of the offense and instead focus on your inner peace. It is an opportunity to hold on to your own convictions, your plans, your solutions. But, paradoxically, when you choose silence, something different happens. It's like letting go of the reins and noticing that, although the path is not immediately solved, it starts to become clearer. Why? Because when you are silent, You allow God to show you what really matters. You stop obsessing over what you can't change and start noticing what He is already doing in your life. Psalm 46 verses 10 tells us, "Be still and know that I am God." That stillness is not passivity. It is a conscious act of stopping the incessant flow of thoughts and actions that lead to spiritual weariness. When you choose silence, you open space to receive clear instructions from God, instructions that can transform your perspective and your decisions. Reflect. How many times have you tried to figure something out on your own only to end up more confused and exhausted? The scriptures show that great revelations came in moments of silence and stillness. Moses, before receiving the commandments, went up Mount Sinai and remained silent, waiting for God's voice. In that silence, he received not only laws, but a clear vision to guide an entire people. Similarly, Jesus withdrew to solitary places not only to speak, but to listen, to be in silent communion with his purpose. Proverbs 19 verses 11 teaches, "A man's sanity restrains his anger, and his honor is to overlook an offense." To overlook an offense does not mean to allow yourself to be humiliated, but to have the wisdom not to allow that offense to control you. Think how many times a hurtful word has triggered a greater conflict. When we feel that we have not been recognized enough or that our ideas are not valued, the natural impulse is to speak up, defend ourselves and seek validation. However, by remaining silent, you are not giving up your value, but rather demonstrating that you do not need confirmation from others. Keeping silent at such times strengthens your relationship with God and with yourself, without depending on external approval. This silence is an exercise in humility. The silence of patience is not resignation. It is a statement of faith that says, "Although I do not understand what is happening, I know there is a purpose behind this waiting." It is like a sower planting seeds, trusting that even though he sees nothing under the ground, growth is occurring. James 5 verses 7 encourages us, "Be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord." Letting go of the need to be the center of attention or to prove ourselves right is an act of true power. Pride pushes us to talk more, justify our actions, and show that we know more than others. However, as Proverbs 18 verses 12 teaches, "Before destruction a man's heart is lifted up, and before honor is abasement." When you choose the silence of patience, you choose not to give in to the temptation to manipulate circumstances. Instead of forcing doors that are not yet ready to open, you wait for the right moment. This kind of silence is an inner discipline that keeps you from anxiety and brings you closer to peace. Exodus 14 verses 14 reminds us, "The Lord will fight for you, and you shall be at ease." This verse does not call us to inaction, but to an active waiting, a faith that remains steadfast in silence. Waiting is not time wasted. It is time invested in something greater. Silence in waiting is like an archer's bow that is drawn taut before shooting. If you shoot too soon, the arrow will miss its target. This silence prepares you for the exact moment when everything aligns. Even when the wait seems endless, the silence of patience reminds you that God's times are not ours. 2 Peter 3 verses 8 says, "To the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day." What seems like a long wait to us is only a part of God's perfect plan. To be silent while you wait is a sign of mature faith, of someone who understands that it is not about receiving what he wants quickly, but at the right time, when he is really ready for it. Finally, the power of silence in the face of pride is one of the most transformative acts we can practice. Pride is hidden in our words, gestures, and desire to be recognized. However, when you are silent in the face of this impulse, you are able to observe it without letting it control you. This silence allows you to reflect on the true root of your search for validation. Do you really need the applause of others, or are you looking for something deeper that only God can give you? James 4 verses 10 advises us, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you." To be silent in the face of pride is to free yourself from an invisible burden that keeps you from peace and humility. Silence in the face of pride is not easy, because the ego constantly seeks to be fed. However, by choosing to be silent, you do not allow doubts or words of discouragement to contaminate your faith. Psalm 37 verses 7 says, "Be silent before the Lord and wait for him." This silence is a shield that protects you from impatience and frustration. By choosing to wait in silence, you declare your trust in God's plan, even if you don't fully understand it. In that space, silence becomes the ground where faith takes root, where waiting ceases to be wasted time and becomes an investment in the eternal. The power of silence before acting. In everyday life, it is easy to fall into the trap of acting impulsively, without reflecting first. Many times we are faced with situations that seem to demand an immediate response, and the rush to resolve them pushes us to act without thinking. However, Proverbs 13 verses 10 teaches us, "Surely pride conceives strife, but with the wise there is wisdom." Here, silence is revealed as an act of wisdom and maturity. Silence, in the face of personal pride, allows you to focus on what really matters. By ceasing to worry about how others perceive you, you can focus on what God thinks of you. This releases an emotional burden that pride can never relieve. As Proverbs 29 verses 23 says, "The pride of man abases him, but the humble in spirit he upholds honor." In this context, silence lifts you up because it reflects that you don't need to prove anything. Instead of trying to convince others with words, your actions and integrity speak for you. Sometimes, the greatest challenge is not to be silent toward others, but toward yourself. It is in those moments of inner reflection, when you realize you are seeking recognition or personal validation, that silence helps you refocus. It is not about denying yourself, but about finding your true value, not in how you are seen, but in who you are in essence. The silence that nourishes faith. Faith doesn't always need words. Often, it finds its strength in silence. At times when answers don't seem to come, silence becomes a powerful tool that connects you to the invisible, to that which you cannot see, but which you know is working on your behalf. You don't need to fill the void with explanations or justifications, because in silence, faith matures without interruption. Every time you decide to remain silent in the face of doubt or uncertainty, you are demonstrating trust in something greater than yourself. This kind of faith does not need to be demonstrated. It simply stands on the certainty that what is to come is better than you can imagine. Even in the midst of a confrontation, when pride prompts you to have the last word, choosing silence demonstrates that you value peace and harmony above your ego. In Romans 4 verses 20, we are reminded, "Neither did he out of unbelief doubt the promise of God, but was strengthened in faith, giving glory to God." This strengthening occurs in silence, in waiting, in the conviction that God keeps his promises, even when time seems to be against us. The silence that nourishes faith also keeps you from the need to seek external validation. Like a farmer who sows a seed and trusts that it will grow beneath the surface, silence is the fertile soil where your faith can take deep root. In that inner space, you stop depending on what you see or hear and learn to trust what you cannot control but know is working in your favor. As 2 Corinthians 5 verses 7 says, "For we walk by faith, not by sight." A powerful example of this quiet faith is the life of Abraham. God promised him countless descendants, but years passed and there were no visible signs that this promise would be fulfilled. Yet Abraham chose to believe, even in the midst of silence. Even if you don't see immediate results, you know that God is at work, and that certainty allows you to maintain peace. Psalm 37 verses 7 exhorts us, "Keep silent before the Lord, and wait for him." This call to quiet trust reminds us that silence is not an absence of faith, but a pure demonstration that you believe, even when you don't have all the answers. Silence that protects and strengthens character. Keeping silent not only has implications for our relationship with God, but also for our interactions with others. Choosing not to speak ill of someone, even when temptation is present, demonstrates a strong and mature character. This act of silence reflects a desire to build up, not tear down. As James 3 verses 5 warns, so also the tongue is a small member, but it boasts great things. Your words have the power to build up or tear down, and choosing silence protects you from misunderstanding and unnecessary conflict. Proverbs 10 verses 19 adds, "In many words there is no lack of sin, but he who restrains his lips is prudent." Silence is a sign of prudence, a wise decision that avoids negative consequences. In the Bible we find examples of how silence before acting allows for clear and wise decisions, guided by reflection and prayer. Silence is also a declaration of trust. When you choose not to respond to gossip or provocation, you are showing that you do not need to defend yourself or seek validation in the opinions of others. As Proverbs 26 verses 20 says, "Without wood the fire goes out, and where there is no gossip, strife ceases." Ultimately, silence is a tool that allows you to invite wisdom to guide your actions. As Isaiah 40 verses 31 promises, "But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." In silence, you find strength, clarity, and direction to face challenges with renewed faith and steadfast character. Silence before acting also becomes a tool to protect your judgment, especially in moments when emotions may overflow, such as tense situations, conflicts, or difficult decisions. When emotions run high, silence serves as a refuge to prevent impulsive decisions. There is immense power in that pause, allowing wisdom to take control. Proverbs 16 verses 21 reminds us, "The wise in heart will be called prudent, and sweetness of the lips increases learning." This verse emphasizes the importance of acting deliberately rather than reacting impulsively. Remaining silent before acting is like pausing at a crossroads to observe all directions before choosing the best path. Silence allows you to analyze the full picture, look beyond the immediacy, and discern the right course. Jesus himself demonstrated the power of silence when facing critical decisions. When the crowd pressured him to act quickly, he chose silence and prayer. Luke 6 verses 12 recounts, "Now it came to pass in those days that he went out to the mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God." It was after this time of reflection that he made pivotal decisions, such as choosing his disciples. Similarly, when someone shares an intriguing story or tries to tempt you into engaging in gossip, silence becomes your shield. You don't need to offer an opinion on every situation or participate in every conversation. By staying silent, you break the cycle of negativity and prevent gossip from becoming a wildfire that could destroy relationships and reputations. That pause provides the renewal necessary to act effectively and wisely. Nehemiah is an example of someone who knew how to remain silent before acting. When he heard about Jerusalem's desolation, he didn't rush into action. Instead, he spent days in prayer and fasting, seeking divine direction. In Nehemiah 1 verses 4, we read, "So it was, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept, and mourned for many days. I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven." Only after this time of silence and reflection did he take clear actions. Proverbs 14 verses 29 also highlights this. "He who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly." Taking the time to be silent is not a sign of weakness but an opportunity to calm yourself, think clearly, and act wisely. Silence is also a strategic tool. Often, the best action isn't the first one that comes to mind but the one born from a reflective pause. This reflective silence enables you to face each situation with serenity and wisdom. Silence as protection against gossip. Gossip is like a current that sweeps people away, creating divisions and misunderstandings. Every time you choose to remain silent instead of letting your emotions control your words, you develop a foundation of self-control. This silence isn't a sign of weakness but of strength. It shows you've reached a level of maturity where you don't need to respond to every provocation or be swayed by every emotion. Sometimes, the true battle isn't fought with others but within yourself. Inner silence is as powerful as outer silence. When you choose not to feed thoughts of anger, fear, or anxiety, you strengthen your spirit. Romans 12 verses 21 exhorts us, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." In a world where quick and empty words are common, silence in the face of gossip makes you someone reliable and wise. You don't need to be part of the noise. Choose to be part of the peace. This silence not only guards your heart but also gives you the freedom to build with your actions rather than destroy with your words. Silence and self-control, a spiritual strength. Overcoming evil doesn't always involve external battles. Often, the greatest victory lies in self-control. Jesus demonstrated this virtue during his ministry, especially when he was tempted in the wilderness. Instead of reacting hastily, he remained silent in the face of provocations, responding only with words filled with wisdom rooted in Scripture, Matthew 4 verses 1 to 11. This self-control allows you to evaluate situations from a broader perspective. Proverbs 16 verses 32 teaches us, "He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city." Silence, then, not only protects you from external conflicts but also strengthens your inner self. When you face situations that provoke anger or frustration, the temptation to react quickly can be overwhelming. However, mastering your words and emotions frees you from the stress of acting impulsively. Proverbs 29 verses 11 explains it. "Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end." Silence does not suppress your emotions. It manages them. It is like a bucket of water that extinguishes any flame before it spreads, protecting you and others. Choosing to remain silent in destructive conversations not only demonstrates maturity but also reflects a desire to live in peace with yourself and others. In that silence, you find clarity and the strength to act wisely. James 1 verses 19 provides wise guidance. This verse reveals the transformative power of silence. It is not merely the absence of words but a bridge to deeper communication and wiser actions. Silence allows you to listen with your heart before reacting. It is a moment of self-control that brings inner peace and gives you the opportunity to breathe, reflect, and avoid saying words you might later regret. In that silent space, you gain clarity to act with wisdom. Proverbs 12 verses 18 adds, "The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." This shows how silence can be a source of healing. When you choose to remain silent in the face of gossip, you are choosing to be a balm instead of a wound. Keeping silent also gives you the power to observe and assess before judging. Often, rumors are based on half-truths or misunderstandings that grow over time. By deciding not to participate in the gossip circle, you give yourself the chance to see things impartially and calmly. Returning to James 1 verses 19, this verse reminds us of the importance of listening before speaking. Keeping silent is not passivity but a demonstration of trust that God has the final word. In the face of injustice, silence may seem weak in a world that values quick reactions, but it is a profound act of faith. Romans 12 verses 19 confirms, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, 'It is mine to avenge, I will repay,' says the Lord." Remaining silent in the face of injustice is not surrendering but acknowledging that God's justice is perfect and far more complete than any human retaliation. This type of silence has the power to change the dynamics of relationships. Remember what Proverbs 15 verses 1 says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Sometimes the gentlest answer is no response at all, letting silence bring calm. Choosing silence is not avoiding important topics but knowing when to speak and when to remain quiet. It is a way to show respect, allowing emotions to cool and preventing words from becoming weapons. In Jesus' example during his trial, we see how silence can be an act of profound strength. Jesus, betrayed and unjustly accused, chose to remain silent. He did not defend himself, even though he could have. This teaches us that silence, in critical moments, is a powerful tool to prevent greater harm and trust in the divine plan. In human relationships, silence builds bridges where words can create walls. Knowing when to remain silent can save a relationship from unnecessary wounds and open the door to forgiveness. It is in that silence where you can reflect and let go of what doesn't matter. Finally, silence is not a sign of weakness but of respect and wisdom. It allows emotions to settle, prevents conflicts from escalating, and lets relationships flourish from a place of peace. As John 8 verses 6-8 teaches us, silence can be a tool for creating space where truth and reconciliation can take place. Ultimately, remaining silent at key moments not only transforms our relationships but also transforms us, strengthening our faith and trust in God. Silence also plays a crucial role in healing relationships after a disagreement or misunderstanding. It's not always necessary to speak immediately to clarify things. Sometimes, silence is the necessary space for wounds to heal, emotions to calm, and both sides to reflect and see the situation more clearly. Jesus himself demonstrated this wisdom in his interactions with others. When confronted, he didn't always respond instantly. Often, he remained silent, listened attentively, and then spoke with wisdom that completely transformed the moment. One striking example is his encounter with the woman caught in adultery. Instead of responding to the uproar of the crowd, Jesus remained silent. He bent down and began writing on the ground, allowing the collective fury to dissipate before speaking the words that would change the situation forever. This is a type of intentional silence, filled with purpose. It creates space for reflection and prevents the conflict from escalating. Let's consider how many times, in our closest relationships, we've said something in the heat of frustration that we deeply regretted later. Words spoken in a burst of anger can cause wounds that are hard to heal. However, choosing silence in those moments offers a powerful alternative. By staying quiet, you create a pause that allows reason and empathy to come into play. This self-confrontation may be uncomfortable, but it is a valuable opportunity for spiritual growth. Silence invites us to examine our intentions and ensure that our motivations align with the truth. James 1 verses 5 gives us an invaluable promise. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But this wisdom doesn't come in the midst of noise or chaos. It comes in silence when we ask and patiently wait in stillness. By keeping silent, we let go of the need to always have the last word or take justice into our own hands. This act frees our soul from unnecessary burdens. Psalm 37 verses 7 exhorts us, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes." In that silence, the door is open for God to act in ways we could never imagine. An inspiring example is found in 1 Kings 19, when Elijah was seeking an answer from God. He didn't find it in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in a gentle whisper. In that stillness, God revealed what Elijah needed to know. This teaches us that we are often so busy talking, planning, and searching for solutions that we forget to stop and listen. It is in that space of silence where God can plant answers, ideas, and understanding that we would never have reached on our own. The Bible is filled with accounts where God's people faced injustices and, instead of fighting with their own strength, waited in silence, trusting that God would intervene. One of the most powerful examples is Moses and the people of Israel at the Red Sea. Trapped between the waters and the Egyptian army, Moses said to them, "The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." Exodus 14 verses 14. This passage reminds us that we should not fear silence but actively seek it as a refuge where answers emerge and the invisible becomes visible. Silence is also a sign of readiness to receive. When we are busy speaking or reacting, we close the door to new revelations. But when we are silent, we give God the opportunity to show us things we could never have discovered on our own. In that space of stillness, far from the constant noise of our worries, God speaks. Not always audibly, but through an inner clarity we didn't have before. Jesus provides another powerful example of this principle. Matthew 27 verses 12 to 14 describes how, when accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not respond to their accusations. Pilate, surprised, asked him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But Jesus did not answer a single word. This silence was not weakness. It was an act of authority and total trust in God's plan. Even in the face of the greatest injustice, Jesus chose silence, demonstrating his complete reliance on divine justice. Silence in the face of injustice does not mean ignoring what is happening, but refusing to be consumed by the desire for revenge. This type of silence protects us from bitterness and resentment. Psalm 62 verses 5 reminds us, "My soul, wait silently for God alone, for my expectation is from Him." In this silent rest, we find what our soul truly needs, a revelation that goes beyond the noise and distractions. Moreover, silence not only allows God to speak to us but also reveals things about ourselves. In those moments when we choose to remain silent, we confront our own doubts, fears, and desires. Proverbs 20 verses 22 states clearly, "Do not say, 'I will recompense evil.' Wait for the Lord, and He will save you." This act of remaining silent protects us from the emotional harm that arises from the desire for retaliation and guides us toward peace, even in the midst of the storm. Psalm 46 verses 10 invites us, "Be still, and know that I am God." In this intentional stillness, we begin to perceive what we previously could not see. The answers we need are hidden among the noise of life. By choosing silence, we create the space needed for divine wisdom to manifest. While you remain silent, God acts on your behalf. This act holds far greater power than anything you can achieve on your own. Silence that brings revelation. Silence is not merely a tool to calm the mind or avoid conflict, but a space where great revelations take place. It was in a moment of trusting silence that God parted the Red Sea and gave victory to His people. This kind of silence is not easy, especially in the face of injustice, as it requires deep faith and humility, acknowledging that not everything depends on our strength. But it is in this state that God demonstrates His power in ways our words never could. Frequently, silence becomes the battlefield where God fights for us, where His plans unfold, and His justice is revealed. Jesus gave us the perfect example of seeking revelation in silence. During His ministry, He often withdrew to solitary places, not just to pray but to listen. Luke 5 verses 16 reminds us, "But He Himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed." In those moments of solitude, Jesus found the guidance He needed to make crucial decisions. When we pause and let silence fill our being, we allow gratitude to rise from the depths of our hearts. Instead of focusing on what we lack, we recognize all we have already received. 1 Thessalonians 5 verses 18 exhorts us, "In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you," and Psalm 65 verses 1 adds, "Praise awaits you, O God, in Zion. To you our vows will be fulfilled." This kind of silent gratitude does not require words. It is enough with the attitude of the heart. Sometimes, simply being in God's presence and reflecting on His goodness is sufficient. In those moments, silence becomes praise, a declaration of reverence and awe for what God has done. It is not necessary to speak to feel a deep connection. Silence is a powerful expression of our faith and trust in Him. Silence and gratitude, the language of the heart. It is in silence that we begin to notice the small things that often go unnoticed. Philippians 4 verses 6 to 7 reminds us, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God will guard your hearts and minds." Silence acts as an open book that we cannot read amidst the noise. Only when we stop and seek a quiet moment can we understand what previously went unnoticed. Proverbs 2 verses 6 assures us, "For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding." In those moments of silence, we can receive the knowledge that comes from him, a wisdom that transforms our lives. The most genuine gratitude often isn't expressed in words, but in an attitude of humility and acknowledgement. It's not about filling our prayers with endless words, but presenting a heart full of gratitude. This kind of silent praise connects more deeply than any elaborate speech because it speaks directly to God. When we choose to remain silent and reflect on what we have received, we realize that we have far more than we could have asked for. It is in this silent gratitude that we find contentment and inner peace, of fullness that does not depend on circumstances. Hebrews 12 verses 28 invites us to be thankful because we have received an unshakable kingdom. It is in this state of silent gratitude that we begin to experience true spiritual wealth. Even in prayer, sometimes the most powerful gratitude is not spoken aloud but flows from the heart. This kind of gratitude doesn't need to be heard by others because it has already been received by God. Final reflection. Silence and gratitude are a language of the heart that transcends words. When we pause in silence, contemplate, and allow our souls to respond from the depths, we create space for divine truths to be revealed. This kind of gratitude doesn't need to be proclaimed because it has already been seen and valued by God. Thank you for joining me today on Mastery and Faith. If you found this discussion helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it. Here are 2 videos I'm sure you'll find interesting. Click on either one to dive deeper into these topics and strengthen your spiritual life. Let's continue seeking wisdom, peace, and understanding together. May God bless you, and see you next time.